A very good morning. It's 91.3 Capital FM, the 5th day of April 2025. On a rainy, overcast Saturday morning here in Kampala, welcome to your ultimate weekend social political talk show, The Capital Gang. My name is Kasiate, Simon Kasiate, standing in for the perennial host of this program, Oscar Semoya Musoke, who is unwell, which happens once every leap year. So he usually does never feel ill, but he is now, and I am glad to stand in for him. Nonetheless, we're happy to be on the program. An interesting week that we're coming to a close to, but for me, a very special morning. And I'll start by getting a bit personal, by wishing a special birthday regard to my two beautiful sisters, Florence and Monica. 2 years apart, born on the same day. Happy birthday, girls. Now back to normal programming. We are closing a week where we've seen quite a bit of movement in the way our country is governed on different fronts. We are closing a week where we have seen a smooth transition of power, and power in only one context, which is electric power as we know it, where we see umeme, which has been our signature postcard image of electricity distribution in this country, handing back to Uganda Electricity Distribution Company Limited, a government company that concessioned it 20 years ago to run its distribution process. And in the course of things, their signature brand name Yaka is now eclipsed by, appropriately, the word light. I mean, what else would you come to a conclusion within as far as those wordplay is concerned? We're also seeing a week that's concluding on the part of some diplomatic maneuvers to try and restore peace with our northern neighbor, South Sudan, which has for a long time been at war internally. We are seeing the 2018 peace agreement almost being torn into shreds. And let's not forget, this is a country where the international spotlight to ameliorate whatever it is that bothers them has really been one of the things on the international calendar. So much so that in February of 2023, we saw Pope Francis, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, and the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, Lane Greenshield, in an ecumenical maneuver, come to Juba and preach peace. Today, a dark cloud of political uncertainty looms over that beautiful country. And a lot more that has happened. But for purposes of conversations, we'll kickstart it from that magic bullet that many have taunted the oil industry to be in Uganda as that will get us out of the biting poverty for which this country continues to wallow into, yes, beyond middle income status. In the studio, two of the regular gangsters already in the house, and in no particular order of importance. Allow me welcome with me a very good friend, the man from the east himself, Abdu Katuntu, Honorable. Good morning, welcome to the program.
Good morning. And good
say
morning
that again,
to
Abdu, I don't think I heard
listeners.
You. Let's say that again, Abdu, I don't think we heard you.
Oh, good morning, Simon, and good morning, our dear listeners.
Welcome to the program once again.
Thank you.
Honorable Ibrahim Semuju Nganda, good friend and an Obi from the Daily Monitor. Good morning, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Simon, and to the listeners.
Make no mistake, listeners, to be fooled by his very soft voice when he starts off the program, it normally gets a bit more feisty as the program continues. Joining us to have a conversation on one of the topics to have a go at this morning is the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer of the Uganda National Oil Company, himself, an old boy of the Daily Monitor with Semuju Nganda, and myself, Tony Ottawa. Pleasure having you on the program.
Pleasure, Simon. Good morning. Good morning, our listeners.
Looking every inch live, alive, and yes, a bit of grey.
We thank God, Alhamdulillah.
And yes, just coming into the studio is another regular gangster on the program, a member of parliament from one of the big constituencies in what used to be known as Greater Bushenyi, Honorable Kateshumbwa Dixon. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Yes, I represent the people of Shema municipality, the second largest municipality.
Well, a man from Chira municipality doesn't seem to agree
second
with
largest
you.
in terms of
He's
geography.
He refers to your area as a trading center
Yes, he's
and
a
not a
beneficiary
municipality.
of one of those motions in Parliament.
Your honor goes to stops in Lateto.
Let's put a hold to the bickering on the program and get down straight to business. You will recall, gentlemen, that as part of government heightening its efficiency in as far as reaping the most benefit from the oil sector, a law was passed and a company limited was created to ensure that it takes charge of the commercial interests of our beautiful country, Uganda, in as far as the proceeds from the oil industry are concerned. And today we want to ask ourselves that even before we see the first oil out of the ground, Uganda National Oil Company Limited has been open for a couple of years, and there's been a lot of work that they have been up to. Question is, how is it going, and what does the future outlook look like? Very briefly, I invite you, Tony, to take us through the journey of UNOC.
Thank you very much.
We should know about UNOC.
Yeah, sure.
We
Know
where we're going.
No, thank you very much, Simon. When you were mentioning the key highlights of this week, you failed to mention the refinery signing. I think it is a very significant one.
I do not want to pull the rug under your feet, sir.
But it's a very significant one. So, it's 10 years this year since the Uganda National Oil Company was, set up. And so many things have happened and so many great things for this nation in terms of, looking at where we are going in terms of development, but also, contribution to the economic development of the country. And when you think about it, UNOC has played in all or the major areas of the petroleum value chain, all the way from the upstream, where we have been very participatory with our partners Total and Senok in the Tilenga and Kingfisher projects. We are part of the ECOP story, which has been a story that had taken a while to really get active. And of course, you remember.
And talk about ECOP, we also see in the week that we are concluding that some financing announcements were made.
Some financing announcements were made. That is a very, very great thing in terms of the progress. But more importantly, the downstream participation. And I'm glad that our members of parliament here made it possible to amend, that act that allowed us to import fuel for the country.
Maybe
all
Tony, we may
petroleum
just
products.
need to get less technical so that our listeners can appreciate which stream we are talking about. When you talk about upstream, downstream, are we talking about the river upstream?
You know what is so interesting? When I moved into the banking sector, I remember sitting in a meeting and they were using so many acronyms.
Absolutely.
And I was completely lost. I was nodding my head just to show I was following the story, but I wasn't following anything. So let me break it down. Upstream. Upstream is what you see in terms of the drilling that's happening or the exploration that's happening and all of that. Now, when you talk about midstream, we're talking about the pipeline conversations. We're talking about the refinery. That's it. And then when we talk about downstream, we're talking about that end product. The petrol stations. And getting that stuff into you.
The host of the show and one of the guests are both journalists. But you are speaking to yourself. The ordinary man wants to hear when he will be sailing the first drop and get the money. So the stream,
and the interjection is coming in from another journalist.
Absolutely.
And we would have declared conflict of interest, which I try to for our listeners to have an understanding of the context in which we speak.
Yes.
That the three of us, Tony, Ibrahim, and myself, worked in the same newsroom at the same time around about the year 2002 into 2000 and somewhere.
Yes.
So now you can understand.
You are really making us look very, very old, but we are not actually that very, very old. So yeah, and I like what Samuju has asked. The ordinary Ugandan wants to know when is first oil coming, and we are very positioned and working towards next year.
And when it does next year, Tony,
yeah.
Does that translate into a reduced pump price? When I go to a pump station, do I get it cheaper now that we're an oil-producing country?
Hopefully, because you see, it's
what?
hopefully, Simon, and I'll tell you why. And I like the way you're looking at my words and being very. So hopefully, and this is why, because we'll be producing it in country. You know, with the refinery on board in the next few years, hopefully by 2030, that means that we will be refining our own petroleum products. We'll be refining our own, fuel. So you won't have to go through the crazy costs that it would entail. For instance, if you're importing it from other countries. Right now, what we're doing is we're importing it from the Middle East, from Europe, and what that means is that there are costs incurred. And
of course, not so long ago,
yes,
we were paying a high pump price because there were middlemen involved, from
Right.
the person we import from
right.
up down to the guy at the pump station. And UNOC came in and took a position in between there to say, we are cutting out the middlemen who, for the most part, have been taking the bulk of what we pay as a pump price.
Right.
We have not seen, or maybe you can correct us, a significant reduction in the pump price now that our own national oil company took this position. And that's why we are even skeptical when we see our Minister of Finance.
Simon, I just want to
say that they are withdrawing some tax off
yes.
the liter of gasoline.
Simon, I want to disagree with you. And I guess you probably haven't fueled your car recently, or you use a company card and you're enjoying the benefits of that. But I'll tell you clearly. If you recall, about this time last year, we were almost hitting 6,000 shillings when it comes to a litre of petrol, for instance. Today, if you went around town, most petrol stations are selling it below 5,000 shillings. In fact, if you went to some of the stations, which I won't mention on air, you'll find it at about 4,700, 4,800, which is a remarkable reduction. If you look at our partners or the other East African states and you compare the prices, or you do a comparison, we are actually doing well.
Without a doubt.
And remember that
a
these
liter of gasoline
countries,
is much
when
cheaper
it comes
in Uganda than it is in Kenya.
Sorry?
I know for a fact.
Yes,
that a liter
it
of
is.
gasoline is cheaper in Uganda
And
than
you
it is
can
in Kenya.
and look at these facts. We import our petrol or diesel or whatever through Kenya. So this is for me a positive thing. And again, we would love to take it back to 3,500. We would love that. But the truth is, inflation is happening, or inflation has happened. These are some of the facts. The dollar will never go back to 2,000.
Can say, colleagues, inflation will happen.
And I can also say, colleagues, the dollar will never go back to 2,600 in our time with Semuju when we were working at Monitor. So things have changed. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is to really make sure that the Ugandans benefit from this opportunity and they benefit from it in the best way possible. And that's what we're here for. At UNOC, we are so focused on the common guy. The whole idea of enocampaniam, we have to do things right for you. We're going into the LPG conversations where we're now going into supporting families and households to use liquefied petroleum gas.
How so?
What that means, or how that is going to happen, from whatever we're doing in the upstream projects or the projects in the Albertine, there's going to be a lot of gas that is going to be produced. These can actually be put into people's households for cooking purposes, meaning that we are doing less or destroying less of the environment when it comes to using biomass and all of these things. But these are avenues that we are looking into as a national oil company, which is unlike so many other national oil companies. And again, I'll also tell you something quite interesting, Simon. We have had so many national companies come to benchmark from us. Wow. As a national oil company. So we're doing something right. And I think it is just, in Uganda, they say, Gacha Mabaga. We are still walking the walk. And hopefully, when we see Fast Oil and we start doing crazy things, the bulk trading becoming a bigger business for the country, or rather for the company, we will, or Ugandans will actually get more benefit from the oil company.
Cynics listening to us this morning, and of course, Tony, you will agree that you and I, for the most part of people listening to us, will say these two guys are known to speak and wax lyrical of great things to come from these company limiteds. I mean, they've had me over there speak about an electricity generation company limited. Now you're talking about an oil company limited. Then we'll be discussing later on the program of a distribution company limited for electricity. And yet, for the most part, we seem to see what we promise as an end or as an end into suffering and an entry into bliss for our people, not coming within the time frame for which we promise. We say we're going to give you a dam in the next so many years, 5 years, and until 10 years down the road, we are still explaining after the 5 years why we couldn't deliver it 5 years earlier. What assurance do you want to give to the kind of cynics listening to us this morning that what you promise as UNOC is not just talk, but you will indeed walk the talk. And if you fail to walk the talk, how then can ordinary citizens who pay taxes to sustain you can hold you accountable?
Simon, we're working in a very interesting environment. Globally right now, finance is one of those critical things for many companies or many projects around the world. Our projects are quite huge as well. And they're so capital intensive. It's having the right conversations with the right funders to make things happen. Now, conversations do not happen overnight. Some of them take time. Some of them take, it's kind of like when you are courting a woman. You don't get her on the first day. You take some time. You take her out and
You're speaking so passionately, like you've had so much experience.
No, but the truth is, it takes time.
Very slow.
No, when you're courting a man.
Example, supposing I say yes now. Now you go to meet a woman.
That's Honorable Lydia Wanyoto Mtendi, who has also just joined us on the program, and she takes no prisoners. Tony, I protect
These
you.
days we quote men. What is he talking about?
I protect
Good
Tony.
morning to our listeners and viewers. My friend, you have sat near me, so get other examples, otherwise you're in trouble.
I thought you would say otherwise I will quote you.
Otherwise I will quote you. Leave the gang when you are quoted already.
Simon, this gang is full of gangsters. I need to be protected.
This I will take no responsibility of what happens to your domestic side, Tony. But proceed, sir.
Yeah, so a lot of these projects, need a lot of support from different aspects. The financial aspect, the technical aspect, and so on and so forth. So those conversations don't happen overnight, and because of that, you find that we have to take a while to get into the decision making. You remember the final investment decision that happened in 2022.
Absolutely.
But you can recall that we discovered commercial deposits in 2006. We began the exploration and appraisal phase, and it took quite some time to get to the final investment decision, which happened in 2022.
All that notwithstanding, Tony, and we agree that you don't just wave a magic wand and boom, something happens. Maybe just for the sake of our fragile hearts, all this that you're talking about, next week I turn close to 50. Will this happen in my lifetime, Tony?
It will,
And
Simon.
don't forget, I have another 50 years to live.
It will, Simon. And I want to really make or reassure you that number one, we're going to have fast oil by next year. Number two, we're going to have a refinery in the next few years. By 2030, you'll have a Ugandan refinery producing petroleum products for our country. But more importantly as well is what goes around the refinery. You're talking about the petrochemical industry. You're talking about all of these things that can actually rejuvenate our different industries and sectors.
Crude oil.
Absolutely, in the country. But more importantly, it's the job creation, it's the contribution to the economy of the country, and more importantly, an opportunity for Ugandans. And I think that's what we are really striving for. It would be very disappointing if this was actually not a Ugandan story. If we never had a national oil company like in some countries where, a lot of this happens and bypasses them. You know what is quite interesting?
In other words, what you're saying, Tony, because we heard from the time the country went up with glee to say we've discovered commercial deposits of oil, and everyone was running down here saying it's a curse. We've seen countries I will not mention where they have huge deposits, perhaps where ours pales in comparison, but the development on the ground, the Muntu Wawansi that you talked about as UNOC's flagship concern, remain to wallow in poverty. The assurance that
Simon, before I can even reassure you, Nigeria has been producing oil for quite some time. Do you know when they enacted their local content policy or law?
Tell me.
2010. You can imagine that. After years,
several decades.
2010. Ghana discovered commercial deposits of oil at the same time as Uganda. They rushed into commercialization. Today, they're working backwards. The beautiful story about Uganda is that, number one, we decided to set laws, policies, and my elder here, Mr. Abdul Katuntu, was actually one of the pivotal people in that process, setting laws, policies to guide the sector, setting up the National Oil Company, setting up the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, which is actually the ombudsman, and making sure that we're doing things the right way. That is, again, about, kind of making sure or mitigating any risk that we have seen in the other countries. People talk about, the oil cost. In Uganda, it's probably a different story because, number one, we have local participation at a great level. We have a great contribution of the revenues of the foreign companies into our economy. I mean, there's so much to talk about that is great in our Ugandan story, even before the first drop. So you can imagine if we're doing things right before the first drop, what it will be when we're having the drop coming in or the oil coming in.
Good thing with our era today, right now,
You keep
Tony,
receipts.
we keep receipts. You see, I can't locate any single story you wrote for the Daily Monitor circa 2002 because then we never kept receipts.
Right.
Today we keep receipts, and Tony, we'll hold you to your word in the years to come.
Thank you.
I'll move it to the table around the table for the gangsters to weigh in on exactly what you have said, on whether they feel hopeful or, like many cynics, feel hopeless. And if they do, why so? Why don't they believe you here? And if they have any questions, they put them right to you. And I'll start in this order. Honorable Abdul Katuntu, you have been mentioned as one of those that were pivotal in leading the legislative and regulatory journey that created some of these companies like UNOC, Petroleum Authority of Uganda, to ensure that as we get into the commercial harnessing of our oil deposits, we have a regulatory base upon which we are acting and we don't get things on trial and error basis. You may wish to weigh in on what Tony said in 2 minutes.
I really don't know what you want to aim. You know, I can only say that it has been a long journey. At the point when I got involved, or together with 2 other colleagues, we kick-started this public debate about the oil and gas sector. The Ministry of Energy at that time was conducting the oil business in a very secretive manner. And we thought this was a very critical public resource and we needed more transparency. And that process led to new legislation to govern what is calling up, midstream, and the downstream, which I can put it differently. You see, we are talking about exploration, we're talking about development, and we're talking about production of oil. I think that can, to go from the...
And more exciting, according to Tony, is the selling of which.
Well, that is now at the tail end of it. The legislation that governed the oil sector at that time was a 1985 law, brought to Parliament then by Max Chaudhry, because it was then Minister of Lands and Natural Resources, which seemed to be obsolete. So we had that very famous debate, hot debate in Parliament. For those of you who follow the politics of oil, must remember, and we ended up doing the legislation and creating these institutions, including, you know, when you are asking our colleague here and you're saying UNOC, I don't know whether even people know what UNOC is. We thought at that time we needed to separate the regulatory framework. We therefore created an authority. But since oil was going to be run as a business, or on business terms, we created the trading arm of government. And that is what we call the Uganda National Oil Company.
Right there, Government of Uganda has for the longest time been touted as very incompetent when it comes to running business. And that's why, again, to go into our next debate at some point, UEDCL was unable to function properly and concessioned out to private companies that are governed by, the usual corporate whatever that ensure competence and efficiency. In you thinking that a national oil company can come in and create the efficiencies and be competent enough to look at the commercial aspect of our oil, how much faith were you running on at that time? And, well, right now, as we speak, let's make an assessment of 10 years down the road. Are you satisfied that what you created is actually doing that for which you created it?
Oh yes, I'm really satisfied. Though it would be too early to judge UNOC. We need to start the reproduction, and of course we have expanded their mandate by law, giving them the monopoly of importing oils, and we see what they are doing there. There are some benefits, and it seems to be a very smart team up there. many of these
Tremendous.
guys. Yeah, and as of now,
Toy smiling ear to ear.
He has
You've been
adequately done
flattered.
his stakeholder engagement.
yeah. They seem to be what they're doing, and look at how they were mostly recruited. Many of them are very, very younger professions who are in different departments
That's
of government,
true.
which were running or functioning properly. Others were with the Katesh Uganda Revenue Authority. Others were in the mainstream government in the Ministry of Energy and so on. And they had participated
And
in the
others like Terry were
exploration.
coming from the private
Then
sector.
others were brought in from the private sector. And at that time, there was a deliberate effort by the president to train people in oil and gas sector, and we really have a lot of human resource
Wow.
in terms of specialized training as engineers, as lawyers, as economists, and so on.
And
So,
communications people
in
never
terms
forget
of
that.
human resource, they cannot say they are lacking. They are there. In terms of being paid properly, they are certainly being paid properly. But there is also a strategic change. You know, there are sectors where, you know, NRM has had this try and error politics and policies. At one time, I said, no, government has nothing to do with the business. So they
It's a private
got
sector-led
everything through to the to the private sector. And later on, they realized there are sectors which it was a big mistake to have them run. And they are now coming back. As
That's
far
a-
as the oil and the gas.
You're preempting our next debate. But quickly, Semuju, 1 minute, and the rest 1 minute before we go in for a break. Strictly, and he knows why, because there's more juice that we are keeping him for.
I don't know. You see, we've set ourselves deadlines before, and we were told the delay was because we must have our own refinery and then the pipeline. The funding had become a problem. We are now told it is resolved. So what we are interested in is the selling of oil and getting it, because you see we've contracted a huge debt as a country, and I think the president did so in his mind, thinking that when we get the oil, we'll be able to repay
Offset.
either all the debt or part of it, and then have money to develop the country. My fear, which I think is the fear of the rest of Ugandans, is when these investors begin presenting their invoices of how much investment they have done.
Like Umeme did.
We've signed revenue sharing agreements, I am told. The formula is there, but the fear remains. So me, I am waiting for that time. So the conversation of how much investment has been made, the pipes that are being fed into the country, the construction of this and that, the airport, etc. We will see the benefit when we begin the actual sharing of revenue between us and the investors.
Tony takes note of that fear and concern, and I want to believe that as he concludes on his remarks, he will allay your fear or even exacerbate it. The choice is his. Lydia, 1 minute.
The oil and gas sector, I think, has been one of those exciting, promising projects or trajectory of revenue collection for Uganda for many years now. Whenever you talk about oil and gas, people like Uganda will take off like an electric lift, you know,
Wow.
to either the real middle income or something near to that. And the timelines included that we shall get the first drop that Otto is talking about in 2025. That's the last I heard. And
This year.
we were not told the month, but this is April. So maybe at an appropriate time, our brother will tell us, because he's in the same sector, do you have the actual month or the date when we shall say the first drop, here you come? I don't know, because the latest we had was 2025, and we are in 2025.
Apple.
It will be very exciting to have this in an election year, that, well, we are going to get leaders, but we also have oil. That's one. Secondly, for many of you people in that sector, I would like to hear the real tangible take homes for Uganda. If you came and told us this sector has employed so many, I mean, Katun to mention that it has taken off maybe most of the finest professionals we have. But I also want to hear about numbers. Now we have 500 or 700 real professionals or middle level cadres.
Beyond the value,
those
we want to see the volume.
those who are building the pipeline, how many are Uganda? It's nice to tell our story, because it's in our time that the actual investments that is visible came to life, because people went to training or it was being grown. But now, if you go, I've been to Bunyoro sub-region, Hoima, and these other places like Bulisa, where the actual projects are happening, and the airport. So these are real, visible, long-term, heavy-duty infrastructure. Even there is an airport, a stadium coming up. So this, we want to hear this story. I don't know whether the benchmark, people come for benchmarking. You have a plan, a program for them when they come, or when you arrive is when they tell you, okay, I think we can go here. We have to market that. Can we have a destination mapping to say, if you want to come to Uganda, and so that's part of our promotional campaigns. So that's out there on social media or on the portal. You are coming to Uganda.
Around this table,
this is the story of the oil and gas in Uganda. So many nationals, so many technology transfer, and these are the projects, big, huge projects. And we are not focusing on Bunyoro, but the story of the untapped one in Acholi sub-region, because I'm told the whole of that lake area that comes down, it is from the Acholi sub-region. And people from Nyoya, I don't know, from these other places across the Karuma, they are waiting to hear about the oil you are extracting under the water, under the lake, and it's coming from upstream. It's coming from Acholi sub-region. So those we want to hear that narration, maybe not from you, but from your partners within the sector. It's one thing that can make Uganda have a face, a smile, other than telling only the sad story about our country.
Without a doubt, and I love the optimism with which you present it. And like I was going to interject around this table, is your colleague Katesh, who's also very heavily invested in not just politics, but tourism. And he knows that him and I have had conversations around going beyond the marketing of our flora and fauna and wildlife into such strategic installations that will also bring in tourist numbers, like China receives those coming to see the Three Gorges Dam, which is the largest hydropower station in the world. Katesh, 1 minute.
Yeah, first of all, I want to congratulate the council. This team is led by a very competent young lady, Nabanja Koskofi, and in short time we have seen her the helm with the likes of Tony, Peter, many young people. They have done a very good job.
But even those before, really.
Let's say, Tony, you have done your stakeholder engagement very well.
Her name is Nabanja.
Not the one you want to talk about.
I'm asking for.
Yeah. So the signing of the refinery, I think that is going to be a game changer, because we know that is taking on 40%, and this refinery is supposed to contribute $3.4 billion annually to our GDP. So for me, I'm very excited to see the refinery being
as a net income, or that will also be part of what we shall be sending back to pay our debt and other
contribution as net income.
Wow.
GDP.
Tremendous.
And in terms of jobs, you are looking at over 30,000. So, and the government
30,000 direct jobs.
And in terms of balance of payment, I think we are almost close to $600 million a year.
Wow.
So the refinery is a game changer for Uganda, because I am aware, for example, of many investors who are looking at tapping into the byproducts from the refinery, the petrochemical industry, all these things we are importing. The issues of import substitution will come to light very well once we have the refinery up. Carpets, plastics, all these will be
Vaselines and jellies.
So I want to congratulate you. Number two, I also want to mention, when we passed that law in Parliament, to have direct
Importation.
purchase of fuel, there was a lot of resistance, largely uninformed. And I remember I wrote a very long...
From which circles? Why are you looking at Semuji when you mentioned that?
I have not looked at him directly in the eye. I just looked at
It is him looking at you.
But,
There were genuine fears.
but the fears and
Yes.
resistance. I remember I wrote a very long opinion on Twitter, which got more than 150,000 responses and views, trying to allay fears, because as a commissioner customs, I am aware of how the oil, the fuel used to operate in the region. Under the open tender system, we were having acceptable margins. When Kenya decided to suddenly shift, Uganda had no option but to take charge of our oil, to avoid the high prices. And I just returned from Nairobi. It is true, the pump prices in Nairobi are more than 100 shillings, Kenya shillings, expensive than
That is 3,000.
Yes. So
Wow.
when they
And reason?
Eh?
Have you found out the reason?
Yes, I can tell you the reason.
Yeah.
Because,
Because that's quite important.
Because
The taxes in Kenya
but
are high.
The major reason is we have eunuch here.
No, no, no.
No.
directly
It's more of the
purchasing-
problems in Kenya than
No,
in Uganda.
When we took charge, the premiums at which we are buying the fuel are much less than what the Kenyan government signed, the so-called GTG. At least I'm aware of that.
Yes.
Number two,
It's about corruption.
I think now they have imported almost 2 billion, close to 2 billion liters. So the fear of Ugandans that when government takes over, prices will go up, I think has been neutralized, and we can say we can trust, in terms of efficiency, we've not lacked fuel, and that was the message I had, in my opinion. And our neighbors are still suffering from the decision they made, actually. And I really want to thank government, because government took a very bold step. Amidst a lot of resistance, that we must take charge. At least there is predictability now. You can know how much fuel is coming in, and there is stability of fuel pricing.
Without a doubt now.
So the main concern now, which I want to pick from what Simon said, as we go into now refinery and all this, remember the production sharing agreements we signed. There are the components of the profit oil, the cost oil. The cost oil is attributed to the expenses that investors have made. And one of the requirements is that they have to be audited every year, so that these costs, the build-up of these costs are documented, confirmed by government. So we must not allow a situation where we reach to the moment where the Auditor General is being pushed to do quick last-minute audit. I hope that annually the oil and gas sector is audited by the Auditor General. Government needs to make sure that the build-up of these costs is well validated, so that at the time we are calculating our profit oil, we are not
On he said, she said. Thank you very much. And I think you raised very major concerns that I think at this point Tony should come in and chime in. But Tony,
But
just to
Simon,
let you come in,
Simon,
just
one second. Okay. You see, I want our audience there to really appreciate this conversation. And if we rush and don't handle the real issues, then we'll not be doing them a service. You see, what Katesh is talking about is so critical. What Uganda will benefit is what we call profit oil.
Right.
And profit oil will depend on the cost oil. If you have high cost oil, meaning the production costs which are being claimed higher, they can even wipe out the entire profit oil. So the excitement, the optimism is about what you would call profit oil. The net profit, what is it there that the country takes after these people have recouped their investment? And if we don't handle the cost of production, which is cost oil, properly, let me tell you, we'll be back here. And Africa as a continent has had this, maybe third world countries that have produced oil have had what we call the oil curse. And it all stems from the cost oil.
Tremendous. Now, Katesh wants to join for a
Another
minute.
thing I wanted to raise here, because we are national already. I remember when the oil crisis, when we were starting that debate of takeover and what, Ugandans were pushing government to come in with subsidy, etc. And I was one of those who supported government not to go into subsidizing oil. Because it has been a disaster. In
I
the
too.
neighboring-
Yes.
in the
I too.
neighboring
Yes.
countries.
Yes.
Where government decided to subsidize oil, and they failed to pay oil companies, and oil companies started keeping oil. So sometimes we need to give the benefit of doubt to government.
In Kenya, it was even worse
It's
because they subsidized
and they could not
because they were coming to an election year,
Yes.
and eventually they took on more than you can chew. The big loans they have to get,
Because
they are
now-
suffering up today.
For
Gladly.
you to subsidize, you must get revenue from another stream
But
To be able to do that.
And
That's
yet
right.
from there is where we
But
expect
you're
the
also
revenue.
telling half the story. At that time, there was a problem of supply. So the prices went up almost abnormally. So the subsidy,
That said,
subsidy
Semuju
were to deal with the
and fellow
situation
gangsters,
that was limited. They are not going to be forever.
gentlemen, that said, that was as is.
yeah,
Gladly,
we
Tony is here, he's
7,000.
listening, and it would be important. Honorable Kateshi, I beg that we address the chair.
7,000.
Tony, you've heard how the conversation
Right,
goes
right,
and the
right,
concerns.
right.
Maybe just to dive deep into it, and you really don't have much time to go into
Yeah,
it.
sure,
One
sure.
would say we have a refinery, we've got a pipeline, and one wonders whether there is no duplication or why. Not that they do the same thing, but if you have a refinery, you may as well not go through the vagaries of a pipeline.
Yeah.
And if you can't afford a refinery, then you may as well go in for a pipeline. But in our case, we have both. What are the advantages that we're tapping into that should allay our fears in as far as going the oil gas?
Yeah, I
concerned?
think
You can start from there.
Simon, they're all advantages. You see, we're going to produce, close to 260,000 barrels of, crude per day. Now, the refinery is a 60,000 barrels per day refinery.
A small
It's
refinery,
a small
yeah.
refinery.
Very small.
It's going to start off as 30,000 and eventually 60,000. But it's a small refinery. So the other 200,000 barrels need to be evacuated. And of course, that's why now the refinery comes into, the pipeline comes into play. It has to be evacuated and taken to other markets. So the beautiful thing about this is that these are two projects that are moving in tandem. They're moving together, and the benefits are quite, visible for the two. So there's nothing fearful about it. I think it's only positive. You need to have the pipeline to evacuate and the refinery to do what we need for the country. In terms of, and I like the fears that Katesh and Honorable Semuju talked about, the whole, profit oil situation, and Honorable Abdul talked about it as well and emphasized it. It's quite important. But I can also tell you, and I can also
They're
reassure you,
existential and real.
the audits happen all the time. That's the beautiful thing. And, the joint venture partners at all times monitor the costs that are happening or
That's what
taking place within.
Electricity Regulatory Authority was telling us.
Right.
That over the last 20 years, they were auditing every year
No, I can assure you it's different.
through EBITDA and other things. Those financial terms.
No,
they use.
it's not different.
Yeah.
You wait.
So we hope.
when we start discussing these real figures.
The finances.
Yeah, because there's going to be a discussion. There's a time for discussion of those figures.
Yes, yes,
When the Auditor General's reports come up,
yes.
and the public gets to know
And
Yes.
that's why
against
era
the claims,
and
and,
the different
and we
figures
shall have
from
that
the
conversation.
Right, right.
What you are saying, well and good, is sweet music, but I hope it
Wait,
remains sweet music.
Absolutely.
the sweetness will be in the actual lyrics, not the beat.
But also, for
Tony.
him to know, you see, oil and gas is laced with a lot of incentives,
Yes.
tax incentives at importation. So the fear we had then, which I think is still valid, is actually you importing the machine of say $10,000 and declaring it at $1 million.
Or doing like some friends of us were doing, where you have to buy a transformer as a customer
So,
on your own money, and they put it on their books as
And I
an
think-
expense.
the collaborative effort, I just hope that your sector together with revenue and auditor general are on top of this audit.
Right, right.
If I know I'm not going to pay tax and I'm bringing it,
You might as well.
I
That is absolutely valid.
Let me
And
tell
as
you, I'm going to
as
give
a
you.
commissioner for
And as a commissioner, of course, it comes with a bit of experience, right? I mean, with a lot of experience, rather. Yeah. No. That is totally valid. And again, that is why the collaboration has to happen, you know. And that collaboration is very evident if we look at how we are working with the URA, you know, in terms of monitoring a lot of what's coming in when it comes to the equipment. All of these things are happening. Maybe what we could do or what we could say is that collaboration being very
Transparent.
evident or transparent. But it is transparent. Yeah.
There's going to be a debate, really. Let me give you an example. The simplest I can give, Simon, because it could be a meal which were being costed in Bunyoro, and a plate could be around 35,000, and you'd have to justify that. Why a meal of an individual person is 35,000 a day in Bunyoro, and yet it could be less, or the same could be like the meal in Kampala. So there are things which eventually, when we come to go to the nitty-gritties, you could have a real debate. And all countries that have had problems in the oil and gas sector, that's where it starts from.
So, Tony, in other words, Tuntu is saying,
Right.
be as vigilant as this man who entered the restaurant and asked for a chapati that was brought cut in triangles. And when he saw it, he decided to reassemble it into a circle.
To make sure it is a
Lo
circle.
and behold, he found certain 2 triangles were missing. It had been sold the whole chapati. So
we are vigilant, and I can promise you that we are actually adding a lot of vigilance. And the beautiful thing about this as well is the kind of manpower and the people that we are bringing on board as well. We are growing as a company and bringing in the right skill sets as well to support on this. So hopefully we will have a great story to tell.
one final one, you know, there's one thing saying you are astute, you are competent, and no one doubts that, Tony.
Right.
I mean, your leadership is applauded all through. No one questions your competences. But the question is, yes, sometimes you will perhaps not deliver to the KPI set.
Right.
What happens? How do we hold UNOC to the highest standard of delivery by saying, if you don't deliver as per agreed KPIs,
Right.
this is the administrative sanctioning that takes place on you.
I
And that's
think-
where many of the government companies
Right.
have dropped the ball, where they just waltz in, get into offices, and because there are no consequences for not meeting targets, then you go back to our usual sleepy or incompetent civil service.
I
As
think
it's so.
we're very as open as possible, and the honourables here will also agree. They grill us a lot of the time. We're invited.
You are open and but who holds you accountable? These
people,
guys?
the people through Parliament. So we are always in COSASE. We're always with PAC and all the other committees, natural resources committee as well, environment and natural resources. And these are committees that question us or ask us about what we set out to do versus what we have done. And it's quite interesting because whenever we go asking for more support when it comes to funding, some of these questions or a lot of these questions actually pop up. So we're accountable to the people through the representatives in Parliament, and I think for me that is a very key aspect, a very key area for us to, be accountable to the people of Uganda, because that company, or this company rather, is a company for the people of Uganda, not for anyone else but the people of Uganda.
Wow. Couldn't have said it more succinctly. And now, coming in from that conversation, let's slightly delve into another topic for today. Not that we are saying, Tony, drop the mic, stay on here. And I must also admit that I know quite something about the next topic because I have worked in the electricity sector before. But let's go back to this country in the early 2000s, coming in from 1990s, where the total coverage of electricity distribution was something less than 5%. And then we had one hydropower station whose generation capacity was still a fraction of its installed generation capacity. We had dilapidated systems, however small the coverage was. And then it was very clear that Uganda Electricity Board was, as a government agency, unable to transact business in the way it should. It lacked efficiency. For the most part, it also did not have the requisite human resource because of the flight of some of our top brains that left this country because of wars and other forms of instability. But most importantly, the government did not have enough money to capitalize the electricity sector to have it running full cycle from generation, transmission into distribution. Hence, Parliament and all the other government functionaries agreed unanimously that we disband UEB, Uganda Electricity Board, into 3 companies limited. The Generation Company Limited, where I was privileged to work for several years, the Transmission Company Limited, and the Distribution Company Limited. But even after doing that, these company limiteds realized and agreed with the government that they do not have the financial muscle and other efficiencies to operate in the spaces where they were given. Generation concessioned out the facility at Nalubari Hydropower Station to a South African firm, Eskom. UEDCL concession to what eventually got to be known as Umeme, which was a joint venture between, guess who? Eskom and CDC Globic, which, interestingly, for those companies that came in as money bags, were told that we're bringing the private sector to capitalize these industries because the government was inefficient, was broke. What was interesting to note is that these companies that came in were not private companies. They, in fact, were government-owned companies, because Eskom is a government-owned company by the South African government. CDC is the commercial arm of the Commonwealth. And they came in here and took sway. Well, 20 years down the road, Eskom operations at Narubara and Kira back to Uganda Electricity Generation Company Limited, and we've not had any brouhaha around it. But enter Umeme, handing over to UEDCL, and oh, what cry and hue we have with us. So much so that we got down to even the finer details of saying, how do you replace a brand name like Yaka to something quite not catchy as Light? On the table today, we are asking ourselves, this kind of handover of power, is it worth it, or have we just received what we have received and we risk going back into our usual inefficiencies, as we've been accused of as a government, our usual lack of financing? Because if Umeme claims they have invested over $850 million over 20 years, does government of Uganda have this money to carry on this? We are told, in fact, that the 429 billion that was paid to Umeme as a buyout for their their investment and all that, has now been transferred to the books of UEDCL as a loan which they must pay back through the tariff. And we're going full cycle into back to the days of darkness in as far as being able to afford electricity and the like. That's the question I put on the table on the Capital Gang. But before we make the answers through, we're taking a short break. When we return, it's more conversations around the table. Welcome back. It's the Capital Gang, your ultimate weekend social political talk show. My name is Kasiate, Simon Kasiate, standing in for the perennial host of this program, one Oscar Semoya Msoke, who is unwell, which happens once every leap year. Colleagues, one of the biggest shareholders of Umeme is, no prizes for guessing, National Social Security Fund. The biggest shareholder. So as Umeme exits and government pays Umeme's shareholders, the biggest beneficiary is a government body called National Social Security Fund. Well, I think Katuntu says there's nothing government about NSSF, and I think I agree with him to the extent that it runs efficiently, competently, unlike what we see in many government institutions. And one then asks, is UEDCL going to be the NSSF in as far as its efficiencies and competence in running our distribution system is concerned? Can we feel comfortable that we are coming from Umeme into a government body that means serious business? Now, Tony, as you exit the studio, having spent your 1 hour speaking about UNOC, do you want to take the risk and walk down that slippery slope of comparing whether UEDCL is going to perform as efficiently as UNOC does, or do you want to be excused so that you let the gangsters do their gangster
He's
stuff?
not authorized
Simon,
to speak about that.
Simon, I'm not a gangster on this topic. I will let the other gangsters take over. I think I'm more oily. I think let me
Than
stick to the oily part than shocky. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure having you on the program, Tony.
Thank you very much, Simon. I appreciate it.
And-
Thank you for having me.
And now we can accept that.
Thank you very much, gangsters. It's a pleasure seeing my brother Semuju. We were in this. I keep telling people I was his boss, when I was Secretary General of the Parliamentary Press Association, working
Where he
with him
was
in
a
Parliament. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Honorable Abdul Katuntu, a legend, and Honorable Katesh, happy
Another
to see you.
legend. You
someone
is about upbringing. I know Tony wants to say that. Tony, you
Thank
obviously
you.
have enjoyed our hospitality as far as Star Coffee is concerned.
Yes, sir.
It would be important for you at least to say, well, even though we don't have the first drop of oil,
Right.
at least you've had a full cup of coffee. What do you say about it?
I have actually also smelt it. It's amazing, and I hope that our coffee story is a great story.
So when
Thank
I was
you.
asking you to come back home and smell the coffee, this is exactly what I meant.
Indeed. And by the way, one of the people who pushed me to come back from my hustle days in the UK
Not hustle
to
days,
come back home,
self-imposed commercial-
self-imposed exile,
Exile.
was Simon Kasiate. He always said, "Come back home and smell the coffee." Thank you so much, my brother.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Let's now get down to the conversation as introduced. Who do I start with? Semuju, you're the guy that really is always doomsday. And it's important that we play into your doomsday theories and feed into what is prevailing as a general sentiment across board. UEDCL. Well. What do you feel?
Simon, I am not doomsday, but the training of all journalists that you must question things.
Speak for yourself, sir.
You know, I'm talking about training. I'm not the only one trained.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Some of us are into this without training, so I understand.
So, like a lawyer, they are trained to ask questions. The let's go back to where the debate started. The privatization and government declaring that they can't do business. You've given the story, no money, no this. There are people who objected to privatization of utilities. They said you can't privatize national water, you cannot privatize electricity. These ordinarily should not be companies that are making money. They should be companies that are offering a social service.
Yeah, but National Water and Sewage Corporation is making money and offering a service to the satisfaction of Ugandans. The two can
not
happen.
necessarily. You need to look at how much money you are borrowing every year and sometimes putting in for them to be able to continue
Because you government
expanding.
agencies don't pay your bills.
Even if they are paying, you see, it's very expensive. The amount of money they need to go and open up. Because if they are running the corporation as it is, it will be making money. But you need to go to areas. Some of the investment they are making is an investment that will require additional funding from government. So that's where the debate started. But as you rightly said, you cannot say government cannot do business and then you import another government. So we need to ask ourselves whether that was a lie. Because they say governments, the indiscipline in Uganda is what made them import other governments that are not as
that are disciplined.
fairly.
Because also ESCOM.
Fair, so compared to when I chaired the committee on COSASE, we did do a report on the sector, and the question was asked at the committee: why do you have companies responsible for generating and distribution and are doing
And
nothing
transmission.
apart from supervising? So the question was, did you set them up just to be, because they concession the business they were supposed to be undertaking themselves? And then we kept asking, so what are they doing?
They are doing like what William Pike does. He set up this thing, but he's not the show host today. He's monitoring from somewhere, ensuring that
It has not existed. I don't think he's seated in an office somewhere supervising you. He has gone elsewhere to do something else.
my friend,
But-
even now as I speak, I know that the owners of this station are
yeah,
listening.
but they are busy doing other things. Let me not go into their other things. But the only job that UEDCL had was distribution, which they were not doing. So we asked.
Let's be fair to them. Umeme was not distributing across the whole country. There was a single
They
digit.
were nearly distributing, with the
Yeah.
exception of a few.
In Chiliandongo, you'll find UEDCL and other places.
These are small, about 0 point something percent.
Okay, let's proceed.
It
Abdi is
was
about to
actually less than 10%.
Yeah.
90% or around that was Umeme.
and other, by the way, distributors, including Farsat, that was
All
cancelled.
of them were just
So those were our findings as a committee. But you subsequently had other investigations into the sector. There was the Saleh investigation. There was a parliamentary committee. And all those investigations came to the same conclusion that we need Umeme out. Why? Because if you go back to at the beginning, the prepaid meter was supposed to have been introduced. I don't remember either in the first 5 years or something like that.
Yeah.
But they kept pushing the deadline because all this was meant to ensure efficiency, that people don't steal as much as they were doing. And then you had arguments that were being made during the time of the concession that these fellows actually, they not bring in as much money as they were claiming. That actually the money they were collecting is what they were reinvesting. Yet we didn't have money. We thought they would come with the financing and put it on table, and then our problems are sorted. So no, the fellows are not doing that.
They actually came as
They
collectors
they have brought efficiency in
collecting bills.
and then picking the money and reinvesting. So they are not growing the sector.
So we were lending them our watch for them to tell us the
So
time.
those were the issues in most of the reports. Eventually, what was common, almost everybody, even if you're not technical, what was visible is that when Umeme came in, people thought they are going to come with expertise from somewhere else.
No.
They just reorganized tables and reassigned people they found here, and then started correcting.
So from the word go, you had John Berry, who by the way is still in Uganda and running Bujagari.
Yeah, but
Chapman,
with the
and then
exception
we
of
had-
1, 2, 3 fellows, the rest of the people were working for UAB.
Uh-huh.
They just took them on and then gave them some contracts, some targets. So what did they bring? That was the first question.
Corporate
That
governance. These Ugandans who you're talking about were badly governed and were
but how
unable to
comes in the
deliver.
national water they are not badly governed? The same Ugandans.
That's a question to answer.
So if you allow them, I don't want to blame them that when they are working.
So in other words, what you're saying, Semuju, really, without
the
belaboring
questions
the
we are
point
asking,
is,
what did they bring in for them to deserve so much money during the time
buyout.
of the concession and then the buyout?
of
So if you begin
$850 million
calculating, you really want them to go. So almost it was consensus by parliament, by cabinet, by everybody that they should go.
But you seem to take
questions
it
you ask-
a notch high, that you want them to go Ngalonsa. They are saying we have
no,
undepreciated installations that we put in place that need to be paid for. We have uncollected bills, and they slapped us with a bill on the table.
Yeah, but you see, the disagreement was not whether they should be paid. The disagreement was how much. How much investment did they make? Because the Committee of Parliament that was processing a loan for them to be paid made lots of claims that substations built by Uganda were being claimed by Umeme. They also asked them, please give us an asset register. I want to know how much.
Including my 3-phase installation for my Akaduka bread that I bought at my own cost, that I want to believe is on their books as an expense. And that, by the way, Silva Sonyu.
So that's the disagreement. Nobody in Parliament, and I've had nobody saying don't pay these fellows. But the question is, are you paying them for the right thing, or you are paying them for every claim they are making? Because at the beginning, when this matter came to Parliament, they wanted about 800 billion shilling, about 220 something million US dollar. And the government went into negotiations before the Auditor General had finished his
Completed
work.
his report, yes.
So this government also made this work look very funny. First, they said we are negotiating. We have actually brought the figure at about 700 something.
That was an estimated figure from the Electricity
Yeah, but
Regulatory
did you have,
Authority,
because
which
the agreement said,
annually gives them
the
licensing
the-
and also looks into their
the
books.
agreement said that they will be audited by a government auditor. That was in the concession. But before the auditor had done his work, government was negotiating, tabling loan requests to Parliament.
And that exactly is what brings us to the question we're asking. All right, we are getting Umeme out because of their funny business model where they are taking our watch and telling us the time. But you as government are too shabby to want to assume this kind of... What are the
I
safeguards?
have said, and let me repeat, I have gone to the... is it the one at Ministry of Internal Affairs, the department that issues passport?
Immigration.
the
passport
immigration and
control.
citizens...
The passport control, where they put soldiers. I'm not saying
Yes.
soldiers are the best, but you can see a remarkable difference.
Or have you gone to renew your driving license, bro?
Exactly. So when you allow people to work and get the right people and give them targets,
they will work.
I have every reason to believe that Ugandans are not stupid people, that they will perform under a Muzungu from South Africa and under Katesh they will fail. How comes URA is able to collect money to continue running the country? They may not collect all the money, but they are efficient in a way. So these Ugandans, once you allow the particular
Laxity.
individuals you have assigned, give them targets. Because what is going to change at Umeme, maybe the board is gone away, maybe some Muzungu is gone away, just 1, 2, 3 people, and things cannot change. The trouble with the government is that they don't want to pay themselves. Even National Water is struggling with the government ministries and departments. One time when they were appearing before Kosasa, I told them, you go and disconnect Murago. That's the language they will hear. He said, oh, the whole country. I said, if Parliament has given Murago money to pay
water bills,
and they don't pay, please
Wait.
go and disconnect them. With the electricity, Uganda Airlines, we need to run away from that culture. But the other day, I saw that Moose had gone with one of the aircrafts
okay, Semuju, now you have
to
gone
Rwanda,
down here.
to Rwanda, and
You want him to go by horse?
passengers were stranded in South Africa. So if we go back to the old habits of a minister traveling to London and he says Uganda Airlines should wait for me, I am conducting a cabinet subcommittee, and you're going to take that discipline to electricity distribution, it will be a problem, and I hope it will not.
I'll turn to Katesh. Honorable Katesh, do you get the sense that a government company limited as UEDCL is going to have the corporate governance nuance to answer to our earlier fears of the absence of efficiency? But most importantly, how about the financing of the operations? They're going to be coming to Parliament with a begging bowl as usual for you to appropriate money for them through the consolidated fund, which has its life cycle and all. Yet, for a transformer in Idudi, where Katuntu is running a maize mill, when it blows, it does not have to wait for a government process of a losing minute, then this, then the other, and the money that takes weeks. How are we going to be able to do business that requires instant solutions and proper corporate governance when
Simon,
we are going to go through government
as
processes?
Katesh comes in, that's why at one time I was proposing that New Vision takes over UBC, because that's the very...
Have you looked at their financial statements in the last 5 years consecutively
all
as New
newspapers
Vision?
the world over are
No,
struggling.
particularly, where do you know which country do you know where a national newspaper
Yes.
comes second in terms of readership and distributorship to a private...
But you know what has happened to them?
So please,
Yeah.
Give examples that can...
No,
national water was still good.
At the time I made that suggestion,
And
New
you
Vision
must
was
respect the
New
leadership
Vision was
of New
not
Vision
run
now.
by State House as it is today.
I don't know about that. Is
You
it?
know, you can pretend, but you know.
Simon, you see, to put this in
Yes.
context, is that if you look at the Auditor General report, in the 23, our generation capacity is about 2005 megawatts. Peak demand is around 1025 megawatts. So technically, we say we are surplus electricity, but 57% of the population are not connected, have no access. Now, there is no doubt that the country will have come with it.
And even those who have access may not be able to afford it as it is.
At the time when Umeme came, 2005, there was the dilapidated network that was being run by UED. At that time, it was established that the sector was losing 4 kilowatt per hour out of the 10 kilowatt per hour being produced. And of course, the energy losses, I think, were estimated to be over 50%. So there is no doubt that in the period of concession, mainly, of course, have invested in the sector. They revamped the network at a very high cost, I should say, because network the year knows, and we talked about it when we were discussing it in the parliament. The agreement could have been done a little bit better, because the concession, we are paying the return on investment of 20%. Very much like in Uganda, which is around In my opinion, of course, it's a report, but like I mentioned, we come of age because when you look at where we have come from as the energy sector, I remember as a young officer in customs when we had power blackouts and the government had to bring in the batteries by Agreco. Every week we were refunding almost 4 billion shillings to Agreco to just keep up to stabilize power. And when the generation improved, Agreco packed their bags and went back to South Africa. And South Africa, where we picked these companies, the Agreco and what, they did not strategically take the same approach Uganda did of generating more power. And years down the line right now,
They are in load shedding.
they are in a lot of load shedding.
True.
Despite the fact that
Yes.
they helped us overcome our. And I remember one time we had a meeting with we were in State House, and some of the colleagues in the Ministry of Finance then were complaining to the President that look, we should stop investing in generation because we have not done much in distribution and we are spending a lot of money. And the President looked at us and he says, I think you should, I'd rather have a problem of too much generated power than having less. Because years down the line, our industries grew to over 8,000 factories. And I remember one of the steel factories alone needed more than 100 megawatts. So having power as a very key factor in production has helped us to promote investment. So Umeme did their part. We should not say that they did not invest. In 2005, when they took over, there was about 6,000 transformers. By the time I think when I looked at the Auditor General's report 2022, we were talking of almost 14,000. 294,000 connected customers versus over 2.6. So remember did their part. The issue is at what cost? Would we have avoided it?
Could we have done better?
Could we have done better? I believe yes, because all these concessions, you looked at them, Ujagari, this one, they were poorly handled.
And let's look at the transmission component that remained in the hands of government, that never concessioned out. One can comfortably say that they have done an incredible job.
Yeah, so now the transition comes. They have taken over 94% of the Umeme staff. But also we have seen, when Umeme came, their
These were not
CEO,
Umeme staff.
their
They were
CEO,
EEB staff.
I think along the way they transitioned and we have had the Ugandan CEO Celestine at the helm over the years. So you can say in terms of capacity building, maybe we have more sufficiently covered now in terms of capacity than then. So the question now
Also, just to debunk something that Semuju keeps harping about, that the staff at Umeme were former UEB staff. Please, Semuju Nganda. UEB stopped existing over 20 years ago. Someone who was working at UEB, one of them is your former colleague, Honorable Simon Dujanga, as CEO of UEB, cannot be in Umeme today. They have reached the retirement age. If you look at the organogram of Umeme, you don't find someone that is as old as 20 years.
See,
So what point are you making?
I'm trying to say
I
that
am trying
the
to
people
find
there
the point. When
have
they came in,
joined.
they took over the staff that were there. It's
Yeah,
just
but
a
those
natural
have since transitioned into new staff with new capabilities and greater training.
So, Simon,
So you wanted the Dujwanga to still be working in
That's what you seem to be claiming.
So in terms of
So they never brought any staff from South
terms of
Africa.
the-
They just brought 2 managers.
in terms of the efficiency distribution,
Mm.
the losses have been reduced almost below 20%. So UEDCL is taking over a very mature baby with a lot of expectations from Ugandans. Unfortunately for them, they can't get away with anything now in this era because every problem now, you see even the Yaka transition, Ugandans are debating it.
The name,
The
that,
name. So the people who
not
are-
anything, but just the name.
Yeah, the
Is
people
it
who are-
Yaka or Light?
But you'll be surprised. I mean, you are addressed the way you are addressed.
Yes.
A name is very important, a brand.
Yes, Simon. What I'm saying
Simon is
in
not
this-
a big
in
thing.
this
You
era
could have been
now-
called Abdul. So
We have had some time now without load shedding. So you cannot give an excuse that when you have taken over, all of a sudden you start having problems. But most importantly, you have seen government has reduced by 14% the tariffs. And as a result, we are talking of about 250 billion shillings now in the hands of the Ugandans who would have paid. And that could be, if it's a business, you can invest in it.
Yeah, it's true.
So for me, I am happy we are off the 20% return on equity.
Was it a correct
It's
decision?
been hard,
Is it
and
the correct
that could
decision?
translate
Or
into
we
a
have
reduction
the 250
in tariffs,
billion
but also
into reinvest?
investment. But government should be
The
able to
one
support
with the reduction.
continuously so that...
Why so, Kadesh? Let me ask. Why Women was not supported by government, but it went and picked financial support from NSSF and other investors who are still here. They are not leaving. Why can't we also make the case that UEDCL, rather than go to a perennially broke government like the government of Uganda, also open up and say, can we have NSSF and other big money bags invest into us so that then they are run as a listed company? Do we see that as a more plausible solution?
I think I wouldn't have a problem because as a matter of fact, I think even these other entities like Uganda Airlines, I think they need to be listed so that you have strengthen corporate governance and you reduce the state arm. But for energy in particular, we must not go into a repeat situation where we are chasing a return on investment at the expense of
Service delivery
and distribution of energy. If we are able to sufficiently recover the costs running the network, and we are able to correct, bills are paid on time, we should avoid. So if we list, it comes with an advantage, but it could also come with expectations of the shareholders of Simon who will buy shares. And I think
Katesh is you're a very interesting character. On one hand, you are against subsidizing fuel to run an economy, and on the other hand, you are preaching government subsidy on a good like electricity. And for some of us, we argue that if you want to use electricity or you have something to use electricity for, number one, just make sure you can afford it, because that way you'll use it responsibly. You'll not be leaving the lights on during the day because you know there's a government subsidy.
There is no
But
contradiction.
there is.
At national housing, national water. And your argument is the same thing I've been talking about. For example, UDB. I don't know why the Minister of Finance is sometimes excited to declare UDB has made profits this year, as opposed to how many investments and economic growth has come. So Umeme, now UEDC, can it be able to break even out of the bills, the energy distribution? That's number one question. Number two, the investment in the network, the equipment. If they need some money every year, can government be able to put in that money as a trade-off for mass coverage that you need to do, and here a time when actually UEDCL can be able to stand on its own?
government from where? If just to buy out Umeme we are running to a commercial bank, to build Karuma we had to run to Exim Bank of China, to build roads we have got to run to Japanese, to do this we've got to run. So why don't we? That's what I'm saying. Why shouldn't we list? But I'll turn to you, Abdu. And before we get down to you, Abdu, a listener called Ambrose Biona, who runs a cement factory in Tororo, says, and I want to quote, showing props to UEDCL and allaying our fears that they are not competent. He says, and I will read, that UEDCL is one of the most efficient entity I have dealt with. They made sure I have power in a very short time. The guys there are true professional, and he sends me a newspaper cutting that has a headline: "Government boosts Moroto cement factory with 35 megawatt power line." We hope that that's not an isolated case of what we call a flicker in the pan, or a black swan event of competence, and that's going to be commonplace. Over to you. That is where we have always dropped the ball, giving a benefit of the doubt and justifying mediocrity because we are Ugandans. Please, if you do not... Thank you very much. So that if I don't deliver, you fire me. Hold me to the highest standard. Over to you. Yeah, he was my head prefect.
You, both of you are students. There was no boss.
You see, about the efficiency, we have been running a very small portfolio of less than, I think, 7% of our distribution in this country.
Yes.
Now we have this huge portfolio.
Yeah, but they've inherited the staff of Umeme.
That's different. You wait. You see, if it's about that, then we could have had the Umeme. And then we have a different opinion. The biggest advantage you have when you import in private sector or private sector thinking is that they run this pure as business.
True.
The first thing UEDSCL has done, which Katesh is supporting and I don't, was to reduce power tariff. And Katesh is saying now Ugandans have got 250 billion to spend it the way they wish. Thank you, Katesh. But I can tell you that is not business. If, for example, they had gotten that 250 billion and see how they reinvest that money in power expansion, especially when you still have almost 70% of young people without power, it would make business sense. Now we have, from the word go Simon, we have decided to be populist.
We are celebrating.
We are now being populist, and we are. You have a company now which has transferred $110 million onto their books as a loan.
429 billion to be exact.
Exactly. Now, how are we going to pay that? We need to be collecting from
the
tariffs and then pay off the loan. Instead of trying to say, okay, some of these tariffs could go towards settling this loan or even expanding the business, we are saying, no, you keep that one now. Populist. Yes, you could be popular. People say now we are having cheap power, but power is, it is a business commodity.
For production, it's not a luxury.
And you see, if you don't look at it that way, then you go back to the fall of, look here, that is why government is not a good businessman. Let us start from here. Was there a bad concession? We've all said it was. Was this concession illegal? No. It was actually very legal.
More than legal.
But the circumstances under which it was negotiated, we were in a very weak position to negotiate a better deal.
Because nobody was interested in coming to do business in a
country.
And
there are two reasons.
That's not true.
There are two reasons.
Okay,
there are two reasons.
Yeah,
why it was not. We were in a desperate situation. We had these load sheddings and so on. And we didn't have money at that time to put in. Then CDC and ESCOM come in and say, by the way, we can pull some resources and put in. And to government at that time, it was offloading a bigger bill because we really needed to expand power and even efficiency because the load shedding was too much and the power losses were also too much.
Yeah.
And much as the Umeme concession was bad, really, we can't take the achievements.
No,
really, that would be unfair. They have really achieved. And can we maintain that as a public sector now managing Umeme?
And that's when I ask you a question, Abdu. What's your support here? Because we don't have money as government of Uganda to keep putting into UEDCL per se, if you ask me. Would you rather they also get listed and bring in that capital from people that have deeper
No,
pockets than
not
the
now.
government of Uganda?
Not now. They need first of all to settle first.
How long should that take, you think?
Well, that must be can only be a business decision, seeing how the government is doing, and the company itself, how is it going, and then you can attract people, because people to put in money, they must be sure. And the only reason why people would want to put in money, if you list UECDL, is because women was doing well. That is the only reason, not because it is a UEDCL. So you want to take on the success of UEDL to attract other
Of Umeme.
of women, to attract other investors.
UEDCL.
So that will depend on how they perform. But if, in my view, and well-considered view, if they continue moving the way they have started, we are in for problems. We are in for problems.
How so?
Because one, government, I'll give you an example. If government entities who are the biggest consumers of power have had problems of paying when it is Umeme, just imagine if it is UEDCL.
The usual. Semuju are do they to it, but
Just imagine if it is UEDCL. And, they appoint the MD, there is a call coming. Why are you cutting off Ginger Hospital? Put it immediately and so on.
Dr. Silva Kisha, they have a
UEDCL
story.
refuse. When the Minister of Energy has called, he has no job. He has no job. But he could not do that to Umeme.
Celestino,
And let me tell you, we might not even talk about the Ginger Hospital. Is it?
a home.
No. It is in Mbarara District Administration. And the general calls. Say, why are we not having power here?
That's
And they put it back.
It's exactly.
Or it could be Captura something or Western something.
It's 25 minutes to the top of the hour, Abdu, and I think it's important that we earn some money here and then proceed with our conversation. But just to set the stage going, we may have to transition into another conversation about the stability in our northern neighbor, South Sudan. So let's take a short break. When we return, let's move the conversation in that regard. Stay with us. It's the Capital Gang. Welcome back. It's 91.3 Capital FM's Capital Gang. My name is Kasiate, Simon Kasiate, standing in for the parent, your host of the program, Oscar Semoya Msoke, who is unwell. We wish him the very best. But we're also comforted by the fact that he only feels unwell once in a leap year. Colleagues, the revitalized transition government of national unity that was formed in February of 2020 in South Sudan brought to its fore, among other changes or the sharing of power, 5 vice presidents. The one that we know is the first vice president, Riek Machar, who is now under house arrest. And for us in the news, we thought that the house arrest was last week. But according to reports, he claims he has actually been under house arrest for the last 7 years because he's not stepped his foot outside Juba. So, Riek Machar's woes began when he expressed interest to contest the 2013 presidential elections, and we have seen South Sudan spiraling down the path of political darkness. So much so that in February 2023, Pope Francis, Archbishop of Canterbury Justin Welby, and the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, Leanne Greenshields, went in an ecumenical effort to try and bring some level of sanity and peace to these warring factions. But all that seems to have fallen down to the ground. We saw President Museveni return from Juba yesterday, having had what he considered and has said were constructive conversations in that direction, and of course also added in the part of strengthening bilateral trade between us as neighbors. We also know that there's been a panel from the African Union of a group of people called the panel of the wise, also going there to try and ameliorate the situation. But questions abound. For the youngest nation in the world that South Sudan is, before we used to blame it on Khartoum, as they pronounce it, today there's also not so much going on in Sudan, as it were. It's also darkness at noon. What exactly can we do more than what we have already done? We've deployed troops there. We have pacified the place. We have taken in refugees. We have provided development cooperation even when we are a poor country. We have tried to sit in meetings and sort out their issues. What more should be done? Even under the ambit, not just as a neighbor, Uganda, but as the East African Federation. Abdu.
The Honorable Hamson Oboa, then I think
The current chief whip?
Yeah, he was then a UCMP. He brought a motion to congratulate the government of South Sudan, the country of South Sudan, on attaining independence. And I made some contribution during that debate.
Bad manners of the neighbors.
And it's like I was this person who knows what is going to happen. I used so many pessimistic words, but I also cautioned and advised citizens from South Sudan who had come to attend that session. One, I cautioned them that they are now taking over the reins of power, but they're not going to be the first country to do that, especially on this continent. Many countries have gone through many problems, and they should be a lesson to them. They should not think it's going to be a bed of roses. One, like all post-independent countries in Africa, they had the problem South Sudan is having at the beginning. The problems of tribalism and sectarianism, bigger tribes against smaller tribes. Almost 70% of African countries on attainment of independence, they went through those problems. But I told them, you have an advantage that there is a history for you to learn from. These other African countries didn't have that history. I wish they'd listened. I told them there is a lot of bad manners which has been exhibited in these African countries. They should not take over those bad manners, including corruption. I wish they'd listened. Because whatever went through these African countries on attainment of independence is exactly what South Sudan is going through. Like there is no history for them to learn from. And the only advantage is that, maybe this one they learned, is that they have managed to stop a coup. They have not gone through the because you remember the most frequent African coups soon after independence. Almost all of them were overthrown. All were overthrown. And now
governments.
Juba has tried to have those coups, but somehow it has failed. They have been very unfortunate. This one, I really sympathize with them. That the person who led their revolution did not survive to manage it.
Probably a coup would have removed him.
Maybe not. It could have been maybe better run. Now, you had somebody really who was there for tribal balancing and so on. Actually, was the second tribal chief of the Dinka to take over. Literally not as a person who could have succeeded Garang. Garanga's shoes were too big for Salva Kiir. And the country is paying the price. We are now trying to help them manage their crisis. But there is now an accusation. It's like we are the ones managing
trouble.
We are trying to help them to manage their crisis, but we are now managing their crisis.
But also accused of fomenting.
That's why we are now the ones managing the crisis. However, if we don't help, what happens? Already, the number of refugees in Uganda from that country, we have reached our maximum.
That's before you look at neighboring Kenya?
Yeah, Congo and other places and so on. So if we don't get sort of involved, we certainly have to receive refugees, continue receiving refugees from South Sudan, and we can't manage it anymore. So we are caught between a rock and a hard place, in the sense that you either leave them to sort out their mess, and that mess spills over to us.
Sometimes some people will argue that you let them fight, the vanquished get vanquished, the victor consolidates.
The Pan-Africans can't allow that. Because we think if we can make a contribution to the stability, yes. But the situation is not as easy as us going and making a contribution. To resolve the biggest problem of the biggest tribes in South
The Dinka,
Sudan,
the
the
Nuer.
Nuer and the Dinka, is not going to be an easy thing to do.
Wow.
Unfortunately, we could be seen today that we are more aligned to one tribe against another.
Just because we are trying to align with the leadership.
Exactly.
Not necessarily trying to-
And sometimes even the public statements we make do not help.
The public statements we make.
Do not help.
The working word is we who. But I'll turn to Semuju. Make your public statement about the situation there, and we see whether it merits the standard of decency. But what's your take generally on the situation of South Sudan and what Uganda can do? Because I think, like Honorable Katuntu has said, we have done so much, maneuvered backwards and forwards, and perhaps even at our own peril and detriment. But the situation continues to prevail. Like I said at the beginning, the Pope and the Archbishop of Canterbury do not appear in the same place at the same time for the same issue. But they came to South Sudan. But see where we are. And it's a Christian country.
I'm not so sure that it's a Christian country.
Your sentiments are fully taken note of.
Animism.
I have been
Those
to,
are the public statements we have been
I've
talking
been
about that
to-
foment situations rather than
Juba.
ameliorate them.
I've been to Juba a number of times as a journalist, as a politician.
And as a trader.
Not yet.
I even witnessed the inauguration of South Sudan as a country. We went there as a group of parliament, and there was hope. That day in Juba, people were crying because they had become independent from Khartoum, from Arabs. And I didn't know that it will take that short period for them, because you see the trouble with most of the African countries with the same history, many rebel groups, it has been integration, because you can't run a country where there was more than one military group, and these ones, even when they went into a peace agreement, the first and the revitalized ones, each group was keeping its honorable group somewhere in their tribal area.
You also
Active.
remember that when Garang was about to capture Juba from the Khartoum government, he was moving in cahoots with Riek Machar, and almost a third Riek Machar disappears with his troops. And they have a major setback. So he's known as a man that cannot be trusted when he's needed the most.
No, I also don't agree with many of the things they have said about him. I have met both of them. He's a more solid person than this one who urinates on himself.
Hey, Semuju, please. Let's keep the conversation
Yeah.
a bit.
The public statement we make.
These are the public statements that make problems for you
No,
and
but
foment
but
situations.
the
in
urination
South
happened in the public, and it was all over. So it was not in private. I would never have known if it was in private. Why speak about others who do it in privacy?
Semuju,
So
how
I'm
many
talking about
things you come
things-
here and say that are never known to the public, but for you claim to have
I'm
been
talking about things that have happened. So the integration has failed. The Dinka and Nuer, and for me the solution will start from there. Kenya has managed its own problems because the Kikuyu who were dominating were allying with others, but they also allowing others to do business, to enjoy it together. You remember the 2007 election? Somehow they have managed. Partly because these other groups don't keep armies. But if they're also keeping armies, the 2007 election, that country will have split maybe in two. The trouble
you have hit the point on the head.
Yes.
All subsequent elections, wherever they have been, if the people in the election fray have independent, loyal armies,
you will have problems.
If you don't have a national army, then you have a challenge.
You will have a problem, and for me, that's I think the biggest failure of South Sudan.
They should
I
unify
don't
and
know how
create
they will
an armed force that's not
they will
aligned on tribal
commission
basis.
and demobilize. And because of what they have gone through, I don't see any tribe surrendering its own army. Instead, they are doing fresh recruitment.
So instead, they look at their tribes as bigger than the greater good that is South
You have
Sudan.
the same problem that you have in Eastern DRC. that you have groups keeping armies. Each time there's a disagreement, they just
Keep worrying where the allies
mobilize, and then the fighting begins.
As
So
we conclude-
Uganda has both economic and security interests in South Sudan.
No doubt.
But the trouble is that while Museveni historically, he does many bad things, but he doesn't misbehave too much in the public. He needs to teach his son to do what he does. Because his son, you cannot be on Twitter saying, I have killed, I don't know how many Nuels I have to kill.
Okay, that's now playing into the public statements that Abdul Katuntu was
Yes,
talking
that I
about, that
said,
we
you see,
make.
in all this, you've seen Museveni quiet. Yeah,
He issued a
he
statement
only met
yesterday.
NRM MPs and he was briefing them there. So the things he doesn't accompany them by declarations in public. But he's also part of the problem there. I don't know, because
I thought he would
I
be part
don't
of
know.
the solution.
yeah, he should be. He
Yes.
should be.
And I thought he is part of the solution.
He's provided the troops there. But when you get Raila Odinga to go and try to meet and he's sent to Kampala, I don't think you are going to be that sort of a solution, that key decisions are going to be taken from Kampala.
Well, in the circumstances, like you said, we are a serious stakeholder from an economic point of view and security point of view.
Yes.
I'll turn to Katesh as we conclude the program. Honorable Katesh, of course, the question of South Sudan and where it is, the best we can offer at this point in time is really lamentations on why the situation remains as it is, and we don't see serious traction towards peace. But and I would want you also to conclude when we come down to the subject that we discussed slightly earlier, reflecting on, for example, how UEGCL managed the transition to get ESCOM out of Nairobi and Kira, which doesn't seem to rear its head with the UEDCL taking over Umeme, because you could see that with UEGCL there was prior planning, there was a proper process that was empirical.
was also different.
Yeah, to the extent, but you see, at the end of the day, it was also a concession, and they could have also woken up at the last spinner to say, get out, as it seems to be. So, when something starts on shaky ground, as we seem to see it with UEDCL, we need some level of confidence, especially from you as legislators, to ensure that you hold the process for us to feel comfortable that we can proceed.
I don't know where to start from, but the subject matter that we are always South Sudan, and all my colleagues have talked about our interests, whether it's commercial, economic, and security. The problem of South Sudan is that when these guys were fighting Omar Bashir, the common factor was the common enemy. And once that was achieved,
They found another one.
politics of identity at the heart of the problem in South Sudan. And that's not going to be solved easily. Because
After it is very big,
because-
3 times bigger than Uganda. They should divide it.
because you have seen even
Actually,
in-
maybe could be the
even
solution.
in the Arab
To
world,
balkanize it?
Yes.
we've seen what has happened in Syria. And
The
all
Dinkas
this.
should
The
have
problem
the
is
only country.
When you go
politics
to
of
UAE,
identity.
each entity is 300,000
And
people.
for Uganda, which exports almost...
So you are saying they should become United Sudan Emirates?
I mean, UAE, each entity is about 300,000 people. Sharjah, Oman. So you can.
Without counting the
where you go
Kadamas
and
and all
begin
that.
fighting.
But even if it's
Okay,
not
but-
deliberate,
Le-
as Cash continues, even if it's not deliberate, it might soon come.
So there has to be different options in the table to look at that situation, because the politics of identity are different.
It's like a Congo.
Ingrained. Even when these guys formed the government, they were actually not working together. They were still having parallel plans. So for Uganda, which exports over $500 million tonight, and with a lot of refugees here, we cannot just lament.
But Oscar, just a second,
Can
Simon.
Katesh
You
conclude
see-
his point?
You are also talking about refugees here. The last time we visited the Ugandan embassy in Khartoum, they have registered more than 1 million Ugandans in Sudan.
The Ugandans who
As
are
a
in
traders,
Sudan
not
are there
refugees.
as refugees,
These ones who
like
are
I said.
selling in Nyanya.
They are
What's the
selling.
difference between them and Dinkas
They are not, they are
in
not
Uganda?
refugees. Let's have respect for Ugandans. The Ugandans who have gone to South Sudan, they are there to take advantage of opportunity. And that is
Economic
That is
refugees.
economic, that is
And many of them from Chira municipality, that's I
yeah,
checked.
a lot of them from all the municipalities around Kampala, including Chile. They are part of the remittances we see. Because if you are able to go and make money, actually that is why we have to intervene. And for me, I want to thank the President and the UPD. First of all, the swift response by UPDF to deploy, it mitigated what could have been a big disaster. Number two, just the President visiting South Sudan, the statement, because the tensions are so high, he went there and he spent overnight. It tells you how much of
But if it is your troops that are there, why would you spend a week?
The President has in terms of the road.
I hope he went and met the other.
For now,
Riek Machar.
before the solutions, including what my colleagues are talking about balkanization, EPC, the most important thing is avoid the breakdown, breakout of violence. You already have a problem in the south, then you have this one, then you have Congo, and when that happens, if South Sudan went to war, then all our problems.
They already at war.
Yeah.
They have been at war.
They already at war. They not that they.
No, but we,
Full scale, you
full
meant.
scale, because
Yes.
our airline still flies there, we still have people there. But if
They are guys still
Then
flying
you
into
have
Ukraine, boss.
of war, then you have a lot of security problems on our borders. I remember when I was
Commissioner
10 years
Customs.
back, we had problems of even having
Illegal.
a staff position that at the border itself, the borders were inland because of security problems. So now, Uganda cannot go into lamentation. We are the guarantors of the peace in South Sudan. So the President is right, and I agree with what his colleagues are saying. There are many things he does that he does not say. So perhaps out of his diplomatic visit, you could still have some
Hope.
that
A lot could come out.
a lot could have come. Because how long are you going to fight? How long will these guys fight? And
Honorable Kateshi, I am afraid time is not an ally on our side. The producers are
Yeah,
looking
I am
with
a
bad
Chiga.
eyes. Yes, I am.
A kid from where? They are the ones who talk about time is not our best ally, but
Yes.
one is gone recent.
Well, where one goes, you know how we produce.
but after we talk about transition,
Now, and I'm afraid.
Transition of 7 years, but not of
I'm
women.
I'm afraid time will not allow us to have that conversation.
That's the most important.
So maybe a wild card, food for thought. One would ask, how about Uganda's electricity distribution moves away from reliance on one sole distributor, and we act like other countries, like maybe Australia, where you have different other distributors, many of whom could even be private, but charged with efficiency and remittance of the money as should be. And we've been having that, but so maybe that model should-
Why is that a question?
No,
Because that's what has been.
well, when they have
some of them were very inefficient.
Yes.
that's what we are saying. We are saying maybe to allow for that to take a more substantial percentage of the distribution network, as opposed to the minuscule 5% that they were enjoying. Who knows? It's a wild card conversation, and you as legislators may wish to look into it. Otherwise, for you, our listeners who have listened to us throughout the program, we thank you. We can't be more grateful. And yes, the Capital Gang always coming to you every Saturday, 10 to midday. And for tonight, it's a wrap. Good day.